I've been playing a new fast-paced FPS recently called Shatterline. The game's alright, however, they tried something that I haven't seen in this type of game yet, including an escort game mode in this low time-to-kill Call of Duty style gameplay. And after playing it for a couple of hours, I can confidently say Escort does not work in this game. The thing that needs the most improvement is the level design. So I decided to analyze what's wrong with the level design and compare it to examples that work so that we can learn what to do and what to avoid when making an escort map. But first, let me introduce you very briefly to my friend Shatterline. Shatterline is a fast-paced first-person shooter where you can pick from, at the time of recording this, 8 different characters, all with different abilities and ultimates. You can choose one weapon from many different decently customizable weapons and play one of 5 different game modes in a team of 6 players. The game offers options for both PvP and PvE gameplay, although in this video I'm going to completely ignore the PvE. But first, we have to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So, what is Escort? In a game of Escort, there is an attacking and a defending team. The team playing the offense has the goal to push the payload through a number of checkpoints before the time runs out. The team playing the defense has to stop the attacking team from pushing the payload. With each checkpoint reached, time gets added to the time bank. When time runs out and there is still an attacking player in range of the payload, the game enters overtime. As soon as they leave that range, overtime starts running out quickly. When time runs out, or a team pushes the payload all the way through, the round ends and the teams swap sides. Then the other team gets the chance to match the distance of the previous team. If they do, they win, and if they don't, well, they lose. Now, Escort has been included in many multiplayer shooters before, the most famous and best implementations being in Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch. They prove that Escort can be a really fun game mode, especially in fast-paced games like Overwatch, where quick strategic decision-making is key to winning the game. In Shatterline, I don't think Escort currently is a good or even fun game mode, and often barely works at all.
But the thing is, he has a beard. It's Escort layers!
Oh no!
Yes!
Where's the submarine?
Okay, this map is kind of like anime.
I feel like the main reason for that is the level design, but there are also a few other reasons which I'll mention at the end of the video. So today, I'm going to compare the escort maps of Shatterline to the ones of Overwatch and TF2 to find out why Escort doesn't work in Shatterline and, more importantly, how we can make it work. So what is wrong with the Shatterline levels? Well, first off, one of the most obvious mistakes is that the maps in Shatterline just aren't big enough for the amount of players in an escort match. Often there will be situations where 10 players will be crammed into a really small space with no way out of the situation. Also, these blue boxes can be moved and kicked around the map, and if they hit a player with a high enough velocity, they will instantly kill them.
No! Yeah, fuck.
They are an interesting gimmick in most game modes, however in Escort they only add to clogging up the main path, often to the point that players cannot get through the choke point on either side. Other times, multiple players will be stuck in a corridor because the flanks are too small and the maps are too narrow for more than 2 people to be on the same flank at the same time. Let's take a look at the width of the main path in an Overwatch map. There are of course a lot of narrow points, so-called choke points. These are the points in an escort map where teams will be put into fighting situations. But if you look at the general width of the map, you can see that the maps are quite wide, easily providing enough space for 10 players. Another problem is that the spawns are very poorly placed. They are way too close to the payload for both sides. With the short respawn time, an attacking team might have to kill every player of a team 4 or 5 times without dying to get the payload to progress even a meter.
Been demoded.
Oh my god. There's a spawn point directly on the cliff, so don't immediately jump.
Let's compare how long it takes you to get back to the action from the second you died in all 3 games. To make this assessment as fair as possible, I tried to find clips where the payload had progressed equally far on the same section of the map in all 3 games. I also used Soldier 76 in Overwatch and the Scout in TF2 as they are the characters that can match the average speed of Shatterline characters the best. Now the results are pretty clear. Shatterline's time to get back into the action from the point of death is extremely short compared to both other games. It is a faster game and relies a lot less on teamwork than the other two. However, taking roughly 19 seconds to re-enter action, which I found to be on the longer end of the spectrum, makes an individual kill feel impactless. This can easily frustrate your players because they feel like they are doing everything they can and more, but they aren't noticing any progress.
God. It doesn't matter how many you kill, they just...
Yeah, they just
not
instantly
working.
respawn. They need to fix their spawning areas.
Right.
Also, the spawns are spawn areas, rather than clearly defined and easily recognizable spawn rooms. This creates irritation on both sides, as I have no idea where my enemies will be spawning, and they have no idea where I will be spawning.
Do you see where their spawn is? It's literally right next to the finish point.
Oh, I need to leave their spawn area. That is... I can just go into their spawn area. Okay.
Because of these weird spawns, there are a lot of dead ends scattered around the map. And as a general tip for your multiplayer FPS maps, avoid dead ends as much as possible. They disrupt the flow of the player, but in Shatterline, they additionally can easily cause situations where you get stuck and become a free kill for the enemy without any way of avoiding or retreating from combat. Contrary to this system, Overwatch and TF2 have their spawns in specific rooms that the enemies cannot enter. These spawns are usually a little off the main path, and at the beginning and the end of a point. They only move when a checkpoint is reached by the payload. This creates more of a predictable flow of action for both the designer and the player. As a designer, it then becomes easier to craft a balanced map with balanced arenas. Having spawns that are at both ends of the point also eliminates the problem of having the feeling of constantly mowing down waves of infinitely spawning zombies, because players would just take a longer time to get back to the action based on where the payload is. This would also cause fewer teamfights, which would shorten the average duration of an escort game, which overall is a good thing for a game with this tempo. So next solution would be to create designated spawn rooms, and then place these in a way that it would take players longer to get back to the action. A big problem is that the maps are way too linear and straight, which makes the critical path a ridiculous sightline. Characters like Mongoose with their smoke grenades become a must pick, because otherwise there is simply no way you're going to push through that ridiculously long sightline. It also doesn't help that every payload map is pancake flat for 90% of it. Yes, the flanks are sometimes elevated, but the payload path barely ever has a hill to get over, which would often help to naturally break up these very oppressive sightlines. In Overwatch especially, sightlines like these don't really exist. There are long sightlines, but there are plenty of turns as well to naturally break up LOS with well-placed cover that will make the sightlines feel way less oppressive. Both Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 use elevation differences in the payload path to break up sightlines. It feels very natural and is a lot more pleasing to look at than constant 90-degree corners and boxes.
Where the fuck am I?
This can also create very interesting soft choke points. So the next solution would be add more elevation to the payload path and add more corners to it as well, breaking up that ridiculously long sightline. Now, a problem with the flanks is that they usually don't branch off far enough or long enough from the main path. They are also very linear, so the defending team can easily predict and keep an eye on the flanks, while holding all the other angles simultaneously. A good example of that is this part here on March. This is one of the most frustrating parts to get through of any escort map in Shatterline. The defenders can see every possible angle that the attackers could be coming from all at once from this one position, and there is no way to surprise them. Their spawns are just behind this wall, so you have to mow them down 7-8 times sometimes without any one of your team dying to get through this choke point. In TF2, flanks will always come out on different places, so that you can't watch every flank from the same position. Also, most flanks take a lot of time to complete, but they bring flankers to an advantageous position, whether that is a high ground or a position from where you can surprise attack your enemies. In Shatterline, most flanks lack that. Instead, they often feel like they are just a very thick piece of cover on the main path. This then creates more traffic on the main path, which worsens the problem of the insufficient width of the main path. A different geometry problem is that the checkpoints are very difficult to recognize. If I were to show you these places that are all in Shatterline escort maps, and you'd have to tell me which of these are checkpoints, which places would you choose? And there you have your answer. In both TF2 and Overwatch, a checkpoint is very easy to recognize, just by looking at the map geometry. This helps players realize on their first game on this map that these are the goals that they have to either reach or defend, without even looking at the UI. The less your players have to worry about identifying their goals, the easier it is to get the player into the sacred flow state. You also shouldn't rely on your UI, because among other reasons, it mainly distracts your player from the fight. The solution for this would be to use the geometry to more clearly define these checkpoints and these final arenas before you reach a checkpoint, similar to how Overwatch and TF2 do it. Now, in relation to checkpoints, we have choke points, and as I mentioned earlier, choke points are the points where the two teams will be forced to fight. Now, there are way too many hard choke points in Shatterline. Having a lot of choke points in an escort map is fine, but too many hard choke points succeeding another, like these, can create a very bad bottleneck, where the attacking team needs to go on a side quest to find a genie in a lamp so that they can wish to win a team fight and pass through this current choke point.
You can't even get through it.
Sadly, there are usually way more than 3 hard choke points, so the usual 3 genie wishes will not be enough. Now in Overwatch and TF2, they have way fewer hard choke points. Because of the way they distribute spawns throughout the map, the devs can much easier control where fights will happen. Fewer hard choke points also leave the attacking team more room to take the initiative and make a move to keep the defensive team from getting to their optimal defensive position. Shatterline's problem lies in the fact that hard choke points are too hard and too frequent. The attacking team does not have a lot of opportunities to make a preemptive strike. With less choke points, a lot of the previously mentioned problems become a lot easier to fix. The map generally feels bigger if you give the players less tight choke points to move through. With fewer choke points, you can also make sure that your flanking paths are more useful. You can direct them in a way to avoid a choke point or chain them together to avoid multiple choke points, but for those it would take more time to get from one point to another. This way, you would reduce traffic on the main path, which hampers the problem of the missing space on the main path. Now that I talked my piece about the level design, I also want to briefly touch on other ways that Escort in Shatterline could, or rather should, be improved. One thing that is missing that exists in both TF2 and Overwatch is an announcer or an alert that the round is entering its final phase. At 60 and 30 seconds to go, the announcer alerts the players that this round is almost over, and it's time for the attackers to regather for one final push.
60 seconds remaining.
At 10 seconds to go, a countdown starts counting down, until the time bank is empty.
10 seconds remaining.
We gotta pick up the pace. Time's running out.
In addition to that, Overwatch will also have special music playing that gets more and more intense the closer the timer gets to 0, as well as when the payload is about to reach the final checkpoint. In Shatterline, there are no announcements, alerts, or other indicators of how far the round or the payload has progressed and how much time the players still have remaining. The only indicators are the UI elements, which are at the top of the screen. All the UI elements that the player needs to focus on in combat are at the bottom of the screen, meaning that it's really hard to keep track of the progression of the match while the players are in a fight, which is usually the case around the timer reaching 0 or the round ending. Another thing I want to talk about is the checkpoint UI. I've talked about the checkpoint placements and their recognizability earlier, but in addition to having great recognizability from the geometry alone, you need the UI as well to help players clarify where exactly the hitboxes for the checkpoints are and how far the payload is away from them. Without a meter indicator like in Overwatch or a clear visible checkpoint like in TF2, it becomes very difficult to tell when you should contest the payload. The checkpoint should not just be barely visible on the floor, easily covered by the large payload. As mentioned earlier, the most fun part about fast-paced Escort is the quick strategic decision making. So mistiming a contest can result in a wasted ultimate, and this feels really bad as the player who is wasting their ultimate because you feel like you didn't have the fair tools to be able to properly evaluate what the right play was, and then to execute that plan. So clearly defining these checkpoints, both in geometry and UI, is very important.
Bro, I can't. I don't see anything.
No. Unlucky. Well played, everyone.
Now, mentioning all of this, Shatterline still has examples of good level design in their Escort maps. This part here on point C of the map Escape, which I showed in the beginning of the video, is actually one of the more interesting pieces of level design in the Shatterline maps. While it's far from perfect, it does create a very interesting and also mostly fair arena. The flank here on the side is pretty and very functional. It has multiple connections to the main path and the other flanks. On the main path, the attacking team has an elevation advantage, but they have to push the payload around a sharp corner where the defending team has the cover and sightline advantage, making for an interesting and fair arena just before the checkpoint. This is where the designers should draw inspiration from when designing arenas and Escort maps in Shatterline in the future. So, to recap, make sure there's enough space on the payload path for the payload and all your players. Place your spawns at either end of the current checkpoint and make sure the time from death to back in action is long enough to where players feel an impact from their kills. Keep the payload path interesting by adding elevation and changing its direction frequently. Make sure your flanks and main payload path can't all be overlooked from one position. Let your flanks branch off far enough from your main path, but make sure you balance the travel time of the flanks with the reward you get from taking that flank. Your checkpoints should be easily recognizable, both in geometry and its UI. Keep your choke points few, and make sure that there are enough ways to tackle the challenge of getting through this choke point. That was my piece about the Escort level design in Shatterline, and a rough tutorial on how to design an Escort map. I really hope you found something useful in this video, and can now design that Escort map that you have been so keen on designing. I know you do, I know you want to design an Escort map, but also, don't take anything I say here as gospel. Everything I talked about in this video came from my own analysis and from discussions with my friends. So if you disagree with something, let me know in the comments. Having said that, I really hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. This is probably my proudest essay yet, and if you didn't enjoy it, dislike the video, unsubscribe and report this channel immediately. I hope to see you again in 2024, where I have some exciting plans for this channel. I wish you happy holidays, and as always, take care.